I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messengers God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives.
Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guest is Brother Don Mouton, who is a member of the De La Salle Christian Brothers here in Santa Fe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Our topic can be found in the Revelation of St. John the Divine, the King James Version, chapter 22, verse 7, and the topic is, Blessed is he. And the full verse is, Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keepeth the sayings of the prophecy of this book. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at the book of Revelation, what we believe it is and what we believe it isn't, a little bit of history. So before we even do that, why don't you, brother, introduce yourself, tell them a little bit about yourself, a little bit about who the De La Salle Christian Brothers are.
I've been in Santa Fe as a professor at the College of Santa Fe, and presently on that campus is now the Santa Fe University of Art and Design, and I teach religion studies there. The De La Salle Christian Brothers is a Roman Catholic teaching order of brothers. There are no priests in our order, just strictly brothers. And when the students try to understand what a brother is that have never heard of a brother, I simply tell them it's what you could consider to be a male sister. We are not priests. Our ministry is not sacramental ministry. It's education. It's a worldwide order that was started in the 17th century in France by John Baptist de La Salle, a cleric from a well-to-do family, and he got involved in education. And what he did in terms of trying to provide education for the needy and the poor spread all over the world over the years. He eventually got to the United States and here in New Mexico. And it's a worldwide order of men that are devoted to teaching at every possible level in the educational spectrum, from the lowest level to university education, as well as education centers for immigrants, tutorial centers, and others. In Santa Fe, the De La Salle Christian Brothers, as we're known, we're also known as LaSallian Brothers. We have had two institutions. St. Michael's High School was founded by the brothers. They were called here by Bishop Lamy in 1859 to get a school started, and it still exists at St. Michael's High School. And until 2 years ago, we had the College of Santa Fe on the present campus of the Santa Fe University of Art and Design. So I belong to that particular order of brothers, and we're divided up into administrative provinces, and the province I belong to is called New Orleans, Santa Fe, because geographically it's Louisiana, Texas, Colorado, and New Mexico.
And you get to choose where you serve, or you get appointed to where you serve?
Well, normally we serve in the geographical province where we find ourselves, our families, where we're born, where we go to school. But there's a lot of mobility. We have many brothers teaching all over the world from different locations. And depending on your field of expertise, you can be assigned or you can request assignment to places outside of your geographical limitations.
Was this the first teaching order?
There were other teaching orders prior to the founding of the De La Salle Christian Brothers. We were founded in 1680. Before that, there were some teaching orders, but mainly of clerics, or sometimes a mixture of clerics and some brothers. But this was really the first full-fledged non-clerical, totally devoted to teaching order that was in the church.
What did your training look like?
As a brother,
Yes.
my training as a brother. I entered the seminary when I was a freshman in high school, which happened to have been in my hometown of Lafayette, Louisiana. Went through high school there, and you try to discern, is this what I want to do, and so on. If after 4 years of high school, or how many years you happen to spend there, you say, I'd like to continue on, then you spend a year of what is called novitiate. That's in between high school and college, sort of like military boot camp, where you study the spirituality of the order, the history of the order. You really try to understand, is this what I really want to do, or at least give it a try. And then after a year of that, you continue your studies at the collegiate level. Then you go out to teach. Then you continue your higher education for masters or doctorates, depending on your particular career aspirations.
So we're going to be talking about the book of Revelation today. Was that, you seem to be very knowledgeable in it. Was that a personal choice? Was this, I mean, did you get assigned when you went into the Brotherhood? These are your studies kind of deal? Or?
No, we actually recommended, would you care to go off and get a degree in this particular area? So happens that my first degree in college was in mathematics. Then I taught for a few years both in Louisiana and Montreal, Canada. And then in the early 60s, our superiors in the province decided to get some brothers with degrees, doctorates, to go to St. Michael's College, which then became the College of Santa Fe in Santa Fe, to teach. And I was simply called and said, would you consider going off and get a doctorate in theology? I hadn't given it much thought until then, but I said yes. And they said, well, go anywhere in the world that you want to go, just come back with a degree. So I considered a number of places. I didn't care to go to Rome. Everything was taught in Latin. It was very philosophically oriented. Germany was an interesting place that I was thinking about, very renowned universities like Tübingen, but I didn't know German too well. And then I considered the Catholic University of Paris. I knew the language, French. I had spoken French as a child. I was teaching in a French school in Montreal. And I liked the approach of the university in Paris, Catholic University. It was both historical and scriptural. So I went there and got my degree there. My doctoral studies were mainly in in the New Testament area. So scripture has sort of been one of my favorite areas of the broad field of theology. And over the years, teaching various books, the book of Revelation intrigued me in a special way because it's so mysterious, so misunderstood. So I've decided that I should spend some time learning about it and teaching about it. And the more I did it, the more I became interested in it. And I've enjoyed my relationship with that particular document of the New Testament for many years.
All right, let's dive right into it. So we have a book, The Revelation of St. John the Divine. Let's start with the title. Who's St. John the Divine?
Well, first of all, I think that I would prefer to say it's a revelation of God through Jesus Christ given to St. John the Divine. It's really a revelation of God. And that's
the first chapter.
Yeah, right. Very first chapter. And so your first question is, who is the author? And the answer is, we really don't know. The information we have from the text itself is in chapter 1, where the author says, I am God's servant. I've testified to the word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ. A little bit later on, he says, I am your brother who shares in the persecution. And that's about what we know from his own writing in the book of Revelation. Various proposals have been made based on the word John. The 3 or 4 major ones have been John the Evangelist, who wrote the first gospel, but that has been discredited by most serious scholars because the language is so different and the theology is quite different. John the Baptist was once proposed, but no one seriously believes John the Baptist wrote anything. One candidate that has received some backing from many scholars is John, the Bishop of Ephesus. So in terms of scholarship, it's a mixed bag as to who might be the author. But really, as I tell my students in general, that's not that important. That's okay for scholars who don't have too much work to do and they're in their studios. What's really important is not so much the message, the author, as the message itself.
Well, okay, then let me ask you this. I mean, Patmos was a penal colony, was it not?
We believe it was, that it was a colony used by the Romans for incarceration.
The reason I asked that question, it ties into my next question. And maybe what you just said is so accurate. It doesn't matter who wrote it, it's what's being said and whether we relate to it. But I mean, if this was a penal colony, do we not question whether, for instance, this person actually had a vision as opposed to suffering a post-traumatic stress disorder-induced hallucination?
Yeah, there are two approaches to the idea that Patmos is a penal colony. It's a very beautiful little island off the coast of Turkey, and it says, I, John, was in Patmos. The two major views are, one, he was incarcerated because he was a Christian proclaiming the Word of God, so he could have been in solitude, in the penal system, situated in Patmos. The other view is he may have gone to Patmos to preach the Word, to evangelize, to say, here's the good news of Jesus Christ. So we're not too sure which is which. So I would tend to believe it's more the penal aspect, because it said, I share in your distress and your persecution. So it seems he was there. Whether or not his experience in the penal colony of Patmos led to hallucinations is another question. When one reads the book, one wonders if they're dealing with a schizophrenic or somebody totally out of his mind. On the other hand, a lot of the material in the book is stock images that
come from the book of Daniel.
A lot from the book of Daniel and some of the apocryphal, non-canonical, non-official books that we have. So one didn't really have to be totally out of it to write a strange book like that. You could open up your box of your arsenal of symbols that were fairly well established at the time and still write that book. But one saying that I like, linked a little bit to the idea, was the man mad, is someone once said, you either have to be mad to want to read the book, or you'll be mad after you finish reading it.
Okay. Along the same lines of giving a picture as to what, where, and when this book was written, I want to talk a little bit about when. I was doing some research and found that there is a minority opinion out there that this book was actually written prior to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, because what I saw was the basic thinking was the way they deal with the temple and the imagery in the book of Revelation. These people who are proposing an early date, as opposed to, I think the traditional date is about, 96 AD or something like that? Mm-hmm. They were saying there would have been mention of the destruction had it already taken place. Any thoughts on the timing of this book and when it was written?
The vast majority of scholars, New Testament scholars, truly believe it was at a later date than the destruction of Jerusalem, which you correctly dated at 70 CE AD. It does seem that John, the author of the book of Revelation, knew about this particular disaster in the history of Israel, and so it's most likely that many of the images used in the book of Revelation are a reminiscence of some of the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple by the Romans in 70 AD. And John is using that particular end of a world to do what many people believe is a prediction of the end of the world, which is really not the major, as we'll see, I hope, later on, the major thrust of the book of Revelation.
Well, let's go back to the Daniel aspect. You sound like you look like you want to say something else.
Okay.
There's a large percentage of the imagery in this book that comes directly from Daniel. So are we perpetuating within the books an apocalyptic story of the current depression of that day and just repeating it? Because, I mean, there was just a history of oppression running through the Old Testament right into the New Testament.
You've just pointed out something that's really pertinent and very insightful concerning the book of Revelation. First of all, the book of Daniel is the only full-blown, what we call apocalyptic book in the Old Testament. You use the word apocalyptic. Apocalyptic usually refers to writings that seem to want to predict the end of something. So it could be the end of the world, the end of a world. There are a lot of cataclysms and some strange imagery, and the book of Daniel has a lot of that. We do know that for the most part, literature called apocalyptic literature, which is a little bit different from prophetic literature. Prophetic literature also seems to predict the future, but the difference being that the prophets were really actors in what they were talking about. Apocalypticists are much more spectators than actors. But a lot of the language is the same, and the book of Daniel is one of the prophetic books in the Old Testament that provided many, many symbols utilized by the author of the book of Revelation. The insight that you pointed out a minute ago, which I find very relevant, is most apocalyptic writing that we have occurred in about 400 years, 200 BCE and 200 CE. And during those 400 years, the major apocalyptic books that we have, canonical and non-canonical, arose, the book of Daniel being one of them. The book of Daniel was written around the 3rd century before Christ, at a time of great crisis, when the Jews were horribly persecuted by the Syrian Greeks, namely the Greeks, successors of Alexander the Great, that were trying to really rid the Jews of their homeland, of their religion, of their identity. And during that time, this book was written. The book of Daniel is interesting because the author claims to be writing during the time of the exile in Babylonia, which is the 600s before Christ, 587. Yeah. We actually know, because of the language and name places and so on, it was written in the 2nd century, not the 6th century before Christ. So he's actually depicting things that happened, but he's describing the past using future tenses. That's a characteristic of apocalyptic writing. Describe the past, but make as if it's the future. The purpose being to show that if God was faithful in the past, God will be faithful in the future. The book of Daniel, especially chapters 7 to 12, with terrifying beasts, visions, conflict, end of time, provided many, many symbols for the book of Revelation in the time of John, who wrote this book, which is also a great time of crisis, when the Romans were doing to the early Christians what the Syrian Greeks were doing to the Jews.
There is a school of thought that the Daniel has 3 authors, and that the apocalyptic was the original author, and that there was 1 or 2 authors afterwards that just kind of added on to the book, so to speak.
That's a very probable thesis, because most of the symbols from the book of Daniel are in a specific number of chapters, as I said, 7 to 12. Not from the first 6 chapters or anything after that. So it's very possible we have multiple authors for the book of Daniel.
So coming back to this whole concept of apocalyptic literature, it's repeated twice. Chapter 1, verse 3, and chapter 22, verse 10, where it says, "For the time is at hand." So to me, that there's an implication that the author, John, is saying it's right here, right now. Would that be a fair interpretation?
That would be if you define it. What is right here? What is right now? Some people, for a long time, the majority view was the end of the world is going to be soon. Others say not the end of the world, but maybe the end of a world of persecution, of conflict. The time is soon. It could also be the time for repentance, the time for conversion, the time for hope is soon. So it depends how one wants to look at what is near.
Okay, so even if we bundle that all together, is there any basis for why so many televangelists, for lack of a better term, brother, are out there predicting this book is relevant here, right here, today, now, this moment?
The answer is yes. It's their own personal religious training, their background, their psychological makeup, their religious convictions that lead to the way we interpret a particular book. There are different approaches to the interpretation of the book of Revelation. One approach, which many of these televangelists use, is sometimes called the literal approach, in which the words mean exactly what they say. The image of the lamb, we're really talking about a lamb. Beasts are like beasts. Whores are the whores. If the sky vanishes like a scroll, as the book of Revelation says, then literally it will roll up like a scroll. If you have locusts with tails of scorpions, then those locusts do exist. These locusts that are described in the book of Revelation have tails of scorpions, crowns of gold, hair like women, teeth like lions, iron breastplates, human faces, and they look like horses. A literalist would say they do exist exactly that way. The New Jerusalem is like a gigantic cube floating in the sky. 1,000 years is a literal millennium. So those that want to take the book literally, where everything means exactly what it says, would come to the conclusion that indeed the end is coming near, and so on.
So if we take it literally, that means if it hasn't happened, if this particular beast you just described hasn't walked up in front of me, then it's still going to come.
Well, that's another area of study of approaches. One is called the historical approach. The historical approach says that all of these things, whether we take them literally or symbolically, have already happened in the past, in the first century, a given historical situation and historical context. Everything has been fulfilled in the past. I call that the archaeological approach. It's all done with, and it's just a relic of what has happened in the past. That's one approach. A second approach is just the opposite. It's a futuristic approach. None of that has really happened yet. It's pending. It will be coming. And so the prophecies in Revelation are not what happened in the past, but what will be happening in the future until the end of time.
Well, okay, and again, you're much better versed than I am at this, but there is an indication of I forget the exact phraseology, but like the Jewish homeland, and 30 years after that happens. So if we were to take that literally, the establishment of Israel was 1947 or something like that? So 30 years from that would have been 1977, and it still hasn't happened. How do we dance with this?
The most predictable thing about all predictions of when will the world come to an end, when will this happen, all these apocalyptic predictions, is that they haven't happened. And so readjustments have to be made all the time. Why didn't it happen? It happens every time that a prediction is made that the end is here.
Doesn't that negate the power of the divine experience that John, we're talking about, is having? That how can he have this experience and then say, well, it's a divine experience, but now what? God's changed the game plan?
It depends what the plan you're talking about might be. If it's a plan of conversion, and a plan of hope, that's different from the plan that the world will come to an end. So I'm not clear as to exactly what you're...
Well, I think what I'm trying to say is, if we believe this was apocalyptic, and there was this, we were being given direct information, and we were given certain time frames within the book for that to happen, theoretically, and if it hasn't happened, to say that we're going to roll it forward, to me, negates the source of the original information. I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
Oh yeah, you're making a lot of sense. Yeah, the book of Revelation is not a timetable for what will happen. There have been all kinds of theories. The most common term that's used is dispensationalism, where the world history has been divided up into a number of, quote, dispensations, slices of history. And the book of Revelation is describing what's going to happen in each slice. We're in a certain slice of history now, which in some thought would be the seventh dispensation. The sixth dispensation was the Protestant Reformation, when it refers to the bowls of wrath, chapter 16 of the book of Revelation. That was one time frame that the book is predicting, where the bowls of wrath were really poured upon Roman Catholicism to rid it of all of its abuses and so on by the Protestant Reformation. So different time slices have been predicted. None of this is really accepted by serious scholarship, New Testament scholarship. The book of Revelation has a fundamental message, much as the Gospel of Mark, the letter of Paul to the Romans. Though written a long time ago, the basic message is still the same. And it depends which book you're reading. The book of Revelation, I don't know if you'll have time to get there, but it's fundamentally a book pleading for first century Christians suffering various forms of oppression under the Roman Empire, not to give up hope, to have confidence that in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, symbolized by the Lamb, standing yet slain, evil has been overcome. Stay faithful. You will participate in that particular victory. And that is true whatever era of history one lives in. So it's not to be parceled out in terms of when it will be realized. You know, I could say the same thing about the Gospel of Mark. Was that just the first century, or can you, I think you used the expression, roll it into the present? It should be rolled into the present. We believe that the Word of God is something that continues and will continue to be inspiration to all who are interested in seeing what is God's will for us.
And I could see that real clearly, the Gospel of Mark, for instance, or any of the Gospels. They're more about a way of living life, where that isn't as always clear in Revelation, that this is about a way of living life. This is about, if you don't stop doing what you're doing, life's going to end, which is a little different perspective from my perspective.
Right. Well, one of the major attractions that I have for the book of Revelation is it is precisely a way of life. To me, that is one of the great beauties of the book of Revelation. In spite of its obscure imagery, symbolism, bizarre things, it's really telling us how to live. And I'm not sure how much time we have left, but
we got time.
The ultimate message is that we must live in such a way that we've got to create a new earth, an earth freed of oppression, an earth freed of discrimination, of cruelty, of violence, and we must take that in hand. And that is a way of life. What can we do to be sure that the victory of Jesus Christ over evil is a reality in my life, in the time in which I live? And that's the message of the book of Revelation. One of the sort of a diversion here, but it's very pertinent, is the imagery. Take an example. Just the image of the sea. The sea appears 3 times, maybe 4, in the book of Revelation. At the very beginning, we're told that God sits on a throne, and at his feet is a sea of glass. The sea is under control, under God's feet. Then a little bit later, we're told a beast arises out of the sea, symbol of destruction, of evil. And at the very end, one of the last pages of the book of Revelation, we're told it's a new heaven and a new earth, and the sea is no more. So here you have an image of the sea. Well, somebody who doesn't understand the symbolism and imagery might not catch the message. In the Old Testament, sea is fundamentally an anti-creation symbol. Very first pages of Genesis. God had to overcome the chaos of the sea to create. The winds, the breath of God had to blow over the waters. And then you read in the Psalms, Psalm 74, the sea has dragons in it that must be defeated. So when we read about the sea in the book of Revelation, at the very end, the sea is no more, we're told that evil has been overcome. But it's only overcome if we do our part in overcoming evil, where we live, how we live. And that has a lot to do with my life. So the book of Revelation does have a great message as to how we should live. That's my view.
Which I love, once you get to that place of understanding the interpretations. It's not right out there like some of the other books.
And that's the big danger.
Yes.
You just don't pick up the book of Revelation and start reading it and say, I've got it. That's why you need good study Bibles that have footnotes. You need commentaries. You need study groups. That's true not just of the book of Revelation, but of most of the books of the Bible. It's not easy reading. It takes some seriousness about it. And the book of Revelation, if it's not decoded properly, can either be meaningless or harmful.
So it's one of the most read, least understood books ever created.
I would say in the Bible, it's certainly one of the least understood. There are others that rank fairly close, like the book of Ezekiel or Leviticus and others. But the book of Revelation is definitely not understood by many people, and it's understandable that it's not understood because it's not easy.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of it. The book of Revelation is so different from other books of the Bible. We're told use your imagination, so that our Christian faith must call into play not just the intellectual but the emotions, the intuition, the imagination. And that's, to me, one of the beauties of the book of Revelation, is it throws me into another world to deepen my faith.
Is that why it was included in the Bible?
I would say that a couple of reasons that the book of Revelation was included in the Bible. First of all, many of the symbols that are strange to us today were rather common knowledge at the time. Two major things. One is the book of Revelation is a great hymn to God's victory over evil. Someone once said, how do you summarize the book of Revelation? And the answer was, God wins.
Okay.
And the second is, it's probably the richest Christology of all the books of the New Testament. If you take the symbol of the Son of Man in chapter 1, appearing in all his glory, with all the attributes of Yahweh applied to Jesus, to say that Jesus truly is the visible incarnation of who God really is. The Lamb standing those slain, death and resurrection. The Christology is very beautiful, that in Jesus Christ, death and resurrection, which occurred because of his life, God has overcome evil. That, to me, was one of the major reasons why the book was included. It wasn't easy. It took 7 centuries for the Syrian church to accept the book of Revelation as a canonical book.
So it got accepted. Let me ask, why is it placed where it's placed? I mean, chronologically, it comes ahead of a couple of the Gospels, or at least one of the Gospels.
Maybe
the Gospel
one.
of John,
Probably.
I think, is about 105 or something.
Possibly.
But I mean, they stuck it at the end. Does that add to its mystique?
Well, it's something like the book of Genesis, which is stuck at the beginning. Genesis was not the first book written, by any means. But it was put at the beginning because of its role in setting the stage for the rest of the narration of the history of Israel. So where the books are placed in the Bible is no indication of their chronology. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is a sequence of the Gospels. Most scholars believe Mark was the first gospel written around the year 70. So you can't go by where the book is. The beauty of Genesis being the first, though it wasn't the first one written, and Revelation being the last, though it was not the last one written, probably the last one written was the second book of Peter, second letter to Peter, is Genesis and Revelation mirror each other. The images from the book of Genesis in the creation story are taken up again in the last two chapters of the book of Revelation. New creation, something new is happening. All the major symbols of Genesis 1 and 2 are back in Revelation 21 and 22. So you have a beautiful bookends for the Bible, but they don't dictate the chronological emergence of the books.
But they kind of, what you're saying is almost like Revelation seals the Bible.
I would say so. To me, it's the last word. It recapitulates so much of the Bible. If you were to take out the Old Testament references, direct or allusions to the Old Testament from the book of Revelation, you'd end up with a handful of confetti. Okay. So it's really taken up all the aspirations of the Old Testament, the hopes of the people of Israel, to show they have been realized, fulfilled in Jesus Christ, as portrayed in the book of Revelation.
I just want to diverge off of this just for a second. What was the first book written if it was in Genesis?
We don't know, but possibly one part of the book of Deuteronomy would have been one of the first ones. It's one of the first ones discovered in the ruins of the temple. And so some sections of Deuteronomy may have been the first book. There are segments that are old, like the Song of Miriam in the book of Exodus, ancient hymns that seem to be very, very old, but they're only fragments of books, not whole books. Usually poetry is older than prose in general. So many scholars believe that some of the ancient hymns that we find interspersed in certain books of the Old Testament are very, very old and older than Genesis.
And my understanding is that there's, the J and the P, two authors that kind of weave their way in and out of all five books?
Yeah, they're actually, German scholars did a lot of work some 50 years ago in all of this, where you discover different, they call them strands of tradition that go into the developing of mainly what we call the Pentateuch, the first five books of the Bible, in contrast to Isaiah and the Psalms and Book of Kings and so on. So it's more than just two, it's really four or five and many subsets of that were woven into the writing of the Old Testament. These were oral traditions that gradually found their way into the written accounts.
So let's go back to Revelation, which is what we're here for. I just had to ask that question. You put it out there, I couldn't let it go by. People would call in and send me emails. Why didn't you ask that question?
Right.
Let's talk about some of the symbology in Revelation. I mean, there's so much. I mean, where do we want to start? Number 7, 666. I've got my own personal one, but I'll say that for a little bit down the road.
Do you? Okay.
What is 7? I mean, we talk about, we have churches, stands. There's lots of 7s.
Well, you're certainly pointing out a very significant aspect of any study of the book of Revelation, is try to get some understanding of the symbols. And we have tools that can help us. Study guides, footnotes in study Bibles, commentaries, ancient studies of the ancient symbols that we use in the surrounding cultures. They're no different. Many of the symbols are all the same. Take the number 7. Why is 7 such a common number? Books have been written about this. We don't know. Some think, at least as far as the book of Revelation is concerned, the number 7 is important, the number 6 is important, the number 12, and multiples, 144,000, etc.
That was my question. 144,000. We'll get to that
We'll
one.
get to that one.
Yeah.
Why 7? Well, some say it could be this. 3 represents God. Doesn't necessarily mean the Trinity. The Trinity came much later. The doctrine of the Trinity is several centuries after most of the biblical books were written. But if you read the book of Revelation, it says God is one who is, who was, who is to come.
Okay.
3. Then you have the north, east, south, and west cardinal points of the earth. So 7 would represent God joined in unity to the earth, God's presence in the earth. So 7 does symbolize a unity of the divine and the earthly. That's
so something like a whole or a completion.
Yeah, right. That God is here with us in the earth.
Okay.
3 plus 4 equals 7. 3 times 4 equals 12. Why 12? Well, people say it's the 12 tribes of Israel. It could be the 12 apostles. It could be this or that. But it's also not totally clear as to why 12. But 12 usually indicates also a complete number. And the multiples. 1,000 represents a long time. It doesn't mean literally 1,000 years. And that's one of the major things in the book of Revelation. That many people will say, oh, well, the beast is a symbol. 7 heads and 10 horns, that has to be a symbol, but the 1,000-year reign of Christ is literal. Then you're making a triage. You're choosing certain things that are symbolic, others are not. We have to be consistent.
So it's either all symbols or all just imagination.
Say that again?
It's either all symbols or all imagination.
Well,
you can't mix and match from what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, if for the most part the book of Revelation utilizes symbols, we should say the numbers are symbolic as well as the characters, and not just say, well, this is a symbol and this isn't, unless it's something very clear that when for example, I, John, is not a symbol. It is a human being. We don't know who it is,
yeah,
but it is a human being. Whereas the number 1,000, one day in the court of the Lord is like 1,000, it means a long time. And so those who take the 1,000-year reign of Christ as literal would have to also say, well, then we need to take everything else literally, and then there's no way you can understand the book of Revelation if it's literal.
Okay, so let's go to the number 666.
Yeah, that's in Revelation 13, where it speaks about the beast. The beast, in turn, is a symbol of probably one of the Roman emperors. Remember, the book of Revelation, if we go for the symbolism, which I think we should, it speaks a lot about Babylon. Babylon, when we say Babylon in the book of Revelation, we're really saying Rome for the Christians, because first century Roman Empire was what Babylon was in the 6th century before Christ to the Jews. Destruction of Jerusalem, etc. Babylonian exile. The same thing is happening in first century Christianity.
So we're making it an association.
Yeah, Babylon equals Rome.
Okay.
Rome equals oppression. There's Rome today in our world. We have oppression today, poverty, racism, you name it. So that's why the book of Revelation is relevant. What Babylon was and what Rome was, we still have it with us. That's why one of my favorite verses, I told you that the other day, is in chapter 18. Get out of Babylon. Get out of oppression. Let's get this world freed of oppression. So 666 it said the name of the number of the beast is 666, and anyone with intelligence should know what that means. Well, whatever it was, people knew in those days. We don't know today. We do know this: 666 is not 777. So it's evil, it's powerful, but it's not the last word. So it means we're dealing with powerful evil, but not the final word.
So, okay, if I hear you, what you're saying then, it's a force, but it's not the ultimate force.
That's right. I would say that's correct.
So then, the divine is the one that triumphs.
That is, to me, the ultimate message of the book of Revelation. Is ultimately, it's a new earth, a new heaven. It's God's work in Jesus Christ through us. And that's why the book of Revelation is such a call to us to make the book of Revelation, which is overcoming oppression, overcoming evil, a reality. We have to make that a reality in our hearts, in our homes, our places of work, places of ministry in the world. We have to counter whatever corrupts, enslaves, devastates, all idolatrous, dehumanizing forces. That's the message of the book of Revelation. At the very end, it says, this must be a place where God wipes every tear from our eyes. And Jesus says, I make all things new. That's one of the last words in the book of Revelation, because of us. So we're called to help make this a new earth. That's the message of the book of Revelation.
And that's the symbology of Jerusalem coming down out of the heavens.
As a bride.
Yes.
Which means ultimately love will triumph.
And it's purity.
Purity, the marital image of the bride coming down from heaven. That's going to overcome evil and oppression. And we're told, live that love that was manifested by God in Jesus Christ in us. And we'll make this a new earth. So the end, E-N-D, that's envisaged by the book of Revelation is not primarily the end of history and the end of the world, but the end of suffering and oppression, the end of beasts, the end of Satan, the end of what empire stands for.
Let's go. You grabbed the next subject I wanted to jump on, Satan. Can we talk a little bit about Satan? My understanding is Satan is a derivative of the Aramaic word Satan, which means adversary.
Right.
So now we have, I think it's in a couple of the Gospels, Jesus is 40 days in the desert battling Satan or Satan. And he at that point sets the perimeter that says, get thee behind me. You know, you are the servant, I am the master, I rule here, you don't. So is Revelation telling us that then needs to be re-emphasized, or did that get reversed?
Well, you've said two important things about...
I'm sorry.
No, very, very important things about Satan. One is Satan, which is Satan, is from the root word, which means to roam around, to inspect. So in the book of Job, very first chapter of the book of Job, God is sitting surrounded by his angels, and one of them is called the Satan, the Satan. It didn't mean something evil. That's a later attribution to the word Satan that didn't exist early on. It simply meant, and you use the word maybe adversary, but it also meant inspector. I like to think of the Satan as God's private eye. And he went around he went around looking and said, did you see your servant Job, great man, and so on and so forth. But Satan wasn't evil until much closer to the Christian era, where the word Satan, Lucifer, dragon, beast, all got conflated together, and unfortunately grandfathered into Genesis 3, where the serpent talks to Eve in the garden and Adam, and many people think the serpent was Satan. The only word used to describe the serpent in Genesis 3 is clever, nothing about evil. But later on, because of other verses in the Old Testament and in the New, the word Satan became transposed into things that did not mean that earlier on in the biblical literature. So by the time the book of Revelation was written, which I still truly believe from vocabulary and other things, that it was a later book, not the latest, but probably around the year 196, 100, and so on. By that time, Satan was considered to be the symbolism, embodiment of evil, and that's why Satan had to be overcome, thrown into the pit forever, and chained, and ultimately overcome in terms of God overcoming evil. So that the book of Revelation is to say that Satan did not have the last word and should not have the last word. And that's up to us to be sure that's true.
So what you're saying is basically Satan got a bad rap.
maybe the rap he deserved.
I want to just cut away for a few seconds. A couple of quick announcements to make. Then I want to come back and talk about the 144,000. I want to just thank you all for being with us today and for your being with us in the past and in the future. This is public access television, and you, the public, are what we're here for. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here at all. You know, Brother Don would have a conversation with me at breakfast. We wouldn't sit here a whole hour talking about the stuff if you folks weren't listening. So I want to get you involved. I want to hear from you. Let me know what it is. You know, if you have questions, or maybe there's topics you'd like me to explore, guests you'd like me to talk to. Maybe there's a show you'd like to do with me. I'd love to hear from you. Contact me. My contact information will be scrolling at the end. It's probably going to be flashed on the screen before we're over with. Also, just want to let you know that I am a spiritual counselor. I believe that without the Spirit, we really do not heal. I don't believe that we could actually solve our problems with the same instrument that creates them, which is our best thinking. And I'm here to offer my help to you. I work on a donation basis, so if money is a problem, it's not a problem. So if there's problems in your life, whatever they may be, and you think maybe getting a little spirit involved would help, I'd be happy to guide you. Want to let you know that next week is a special show. Not that today's isn't special because my guest. Next week's show is special because it's my 100th original show. So we're going to have a few of old friends on we're going to talk about religion and human values. And at this point, I know we're going to have Reverend Dr. Richard Murphy, Reverend Brendan Batchelor, and Chris Grissom, and there may be a few more surprises. So tune in and celebrate my 100th show with me. And I think that's about the end of my announcements. So you got all prepared. I was watching you. 144,000 shall be saved. Well, what does that mean?
Well, the first thing I want to say is congratulations on the 100th anniversary of your show. It's a tremendous amount of work you've done, and I applaud you for that.
Thank you so
144,000. That's a number of places in the book of Revelation. The one I was looking at here is in chapter 7, where it says, I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000. Some religions, some people believe that only 144,000 people will be saved. That's a concrete number that will be saved. So 144,000 have been sealed, says chapter 7, verse 4. Then it lists 12,000 from the 12 tribes of Israel, and they list all the tribes. That's 144,000. Should that be taken literally? Well, verse 9 says, I looked, and there was a great multitude that no one could count. So right away, the book of Revelation is telling us this is not to be taken literally. 144,000 is a great multitude that no one can count. So we're told that 144,000 is not to be taken literally. The very first chapter of the book of Revelation speaks about the lampstands, and then says, but the lampstands truly represent angels that are guarding the churches. So the book is telling us these are metaphors. Translate them. They're symbols. They're not to be taken literally.
So how would you translate that then?
Translate what?
The 144,000. Are you saying to us that...
That means many. Many will be saved.
Now you're saying many. Does that mean everyone?
You know, I teach a class at the university it's actually, we're doing a study of Milton's Paradise Lost. A lot of Satan and Lucifer in there, by the way.
I'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven.
That's right.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, and the idea was, the discussion came up, did Milton believe ultimately, or is Paradise Lost saying ultimately, everyone will be saved ultimately, or is there a hell for all eternity? And that's been a big discussion over the years. The Christian church, the Roman Catholic Church at least, has never definitively said yes or no. One very famous church father, early writer, maybe one of the most incredible intellects the Western world has ever known. In Christian tradition is Origen, 2nd century, Origen.
Yeah.
And Origen believed.
He was a pope, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't a pope.
Oh,
No.
okay.
Origen was one of the great theologians, 2nd century, 200s. And he believed in what is called universal salvation. The Greek word is apokatastasis, and he has that in his writings, that ultimately everyone will be saved. That has never been condemned officially by the church. Not liked too much, but never really condemned. Some of his later writings, there's some ambiguity. But the question remains, what view of God is behind the thought that some people will be damned forever? How can you justify God's love with that thought? Others say, how can you justify God's justice if the thought is that some people that we think should really be forever punished, not be so punished? So you've got competing ideas about what picture of God stands behind your perspective on whether everyone will be saved or not. But 144,000 is simply saying a great multitude, and that's consoling. I have a chance of belonging to that multitude. I may be saved.
I hear you. You know, when you and I sat and talked over breakfast the other day, one of the things I think I said to you was, my own personal experience, I cannot, any shape or form, believe in a God that would be punishing, vindictive, or any of that. So I believe it represents all, but I think there's a lot of people, saying, I'm one of the chosen. They got this ego problem, and it's like, I've got to be one of the chosen, or I'm not okay.
Yeah, and there's some groups that believe that.
I know.
So 144,000. That was, I guess, your last question, more or less. Is again, it's a symbolic number. The chapter 7 itself tells us it's a great multitude, and I think that's a good caution that we should take to heart. My last word would be, we're called to help make this a new earth. That's our job. You're doing this in your ministry in a very beautiful way. I'm trying to do what I can in my education ministry. Others are doing what they can in so many other ways. The people working here, making all of this available to so many people. So we all have to be working together. How can we truly do what the book of Revelation is asking us to do? Not predicting the end of the world, but making this a better world. Last word. Revelation tells us what's important is not what the future holds, but who holds the future.
Okay. With that, we got to cut. We ran out of time. Thank you for watching. Blessings to you all. See you next week. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.